Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar by the Gary Smith Partnership on this crucial subject of user adoption. We're going to be talking about Salesforce user adoption because the simple fact is that poor user adoption bedevils many CRM implementations, not just Salesforce. And of course, unless users use the system in the way that you intend, you're simply not going to get the benefits from your investment in licenses. So that's our subject, Salesforce user adoption. So when I talk about user adoption, I don't just mean have people logged into the system. What's much more important is what people are doing when they're logged into the system, the quality of work that they're doing in the system. So for example, are all of the opportunity dates up to date? Are there any opportunities with close dates in the past? Are the stages up to date? Are people entering new contacts? Are they entering new contacts with email addresses? Are they recording activities in the system? Because unless they're doing those things, your sales forecast will not be accurate, your pipeline visibility will not be up to date, you won't be increasing your database of people to whom you can market and send marketing communications. Now, many companies do come to us with user adoption challenges, and often the starting point for those conversations is training. We need to do some training because we've got a user adoption issue. Now, undoubtedly, training is often part of it's often part of the process of driving up user adoption, of achieving full user adoption. But very often the adoption issues go much deeper than that. It's often a multifaceted issue in which training is only part of the solution. There are other issues driving user adoption. And often user adoption is a bit of a intractable, or seems like a bit of an intractable subject. There are many issues that might be leading to poor user adoption, and there might be a number of different things that you need to do to achieve full user adoption. And like many problems that seem intractable, in order to solve those problems, you need to do two things. The first is put a bit of structure on the problem, understand why it might be happening. And secondly, have a series of strategies, some things that you can do once you understand the problem, things that you can do to solve the problem, and in this case to achieve full user adoption. So that's what we're going to talk about on this webinar, how you put a bit of structure on the problem and the things that you can do when you understand a bit more about what's causing the problem. So let's deal with the first of those. How do we structure the issue? This is the framework that we often use with customers to understand more about the issue. It's a 2x2 matrix. We have how able are people to use the system on the horizontal axis, and how willing are they to use the system on the vertical axis. So for example, those people who are both willing and able to use the system, you probably don't have a user adoption with these people. These are the people who were involved in the project at the start. These are your champions. These are people who might be training other people to use the system. Let's talk about this group. They're willing to use the system, but they're simply not able to use it. Why wouldn't people be able to use Salesforce? Well, it could be that the system simply hasn't been configured, hasn't been adapted to do what they need to do. Perhaps the relevant fields haven't been created. Maybe there's no dashboards for them to get pipeline visibility. It could be various things. I spoke to a prospective customer in Chicago literally last night. He's a sales manager, and he had just been given Salesforce, so there was nowhere for him to, he was in the real estate industry, there was literally nowhere for him to record the key information he needs about properties that he's selling. He had to import his own data, and by accident he'd done it twice. There was no dashboards and reports set up and so on. So he was perfectly game, he was perfectly willing to use the system. He simply wasn't able to use it. This is an interesting group. This group are able to use the system, but they're simply not willing to use it. Now, why wouldn't people be willing to use the system? Well, not all salespeople vote for more visibility of the sales pipeline, more visibility of sales performance, particularly if you're not a top performer. But some of these issues can also be management driven as well. So to take a sporting analogy, if you use the better visibility of sales performance, if you use reports and dashboards as a pundit and not as a coach, then you risk driving down user adoption. Another example would be conversion rates. If you put too much emphasis on conversion rates, on opportunity win rates, then you risk discouraging people from entering early stage opportunities into the pipeline. They'll only enter early stage opportunities once they're confident a deal is there to be done. So on the one hand, you're losing visibility of the pipeline, and it's due to lower user adoption. The same thing actually at the other end of the scale. If there's too much emphasis on the size of the pipeline, then you discourage people from taking deals out of the pipeline that no longer have legs, because there's too much emphasis on the size of the pipeline. So they are both different forms of poor or low user adoption. This other group, my experience is that if people are unable and unwilling in terms of Salesforce adoption, then very often they're unable and unwilling on a whole raft of other issues as well. So often with that group, the challenge runs deeper. It's more of a performance management issue that you're dealing with rather than, strictly speaking, a Salesforce user adoption issue. Now, in applying this framework, you can probably think of certain individuals within your company that might fit in different boxes in terms of willing to use the system and able to use it. But what you're really trying to do is say, well, where are the larger group of people? Where is the company at in terms of willing and able to use the system? Because when you decide where the larger group of people are, that's when you can decide what you're going to do about it. So once you know where the mindset is in terms of these 4 boxes, then you can decide what to do about it. So how do you know where people are in terms of being willing and able to use the system? Well, some of it might be intuition, talking to people. You can also use workshops. We run quite a few workshops where we go through the system, we go through Salesforce end to end, from a lead through to a one opportunity. And that's very useful in terms of identifying both quick wins and things that might take longer to do but will deliver a lot of benefit. But it's also very revealing in understanding where people are in terms of being willing and able to use the system. So really the objective is to decide for the large group of people, where are we in terms of these 4 boxes? And when you've done that, you can then look at these 4 things that every company needs to do to drive user adoption. Now, depending on which of those 4 boxes your larger group of people are in, will determine the amount of emphasis you need to put on each one of these, particularly the first 2. So for example, the first one is you must create an advantage to using the system. It must be easier to do my job using the system than not using it. Well, all of those people who are willing to use it but unable, this is where you need to put the bulk of the effort, creating an advantage to using the system, making it easier to do my job using the system than not using it. Now, every company needs to do that, but that second point, create a disadvantage to not using it. What do I mean by that? Well, to give you an example, let's say, for example, the only way I can get approval for a pricing discount is through the system, is by using the approval process within Salesforce. So don't send me an email. You must use the system to get a pricing approval. So I'm making it more difficult to do my job unless I use the system. Now, if you've got a large group of people who are able to use it but unwilling, then you might put more emphasis on strategy number 2. You still want to do number 1, but there might be a greater degree of emphasis on number 2. And I'm going to give you an example of that as we go through. The third thing every company must do is measure user adoption. And again, I'm going to give some examples of this, because unless you measure it, like anything else in the world, you can't manage it effectively. So you don't want to be basing your management of user adoption on hearsay, on perception. You want to base it on some hard numbers. So let's just give you some examples of each of those. Let's look at the first one, create an advantage to using the system. There are lots of ways you can use Salesforce. You can adapt Salesforce to make it easier to do my job. Let's look at that first one, deliver insight. I'm talking about reports and dashboards that do give accurate and robust visibility of the sales pipeline. I'll give you an example of that in just 1 second. Other things like tracking targets, using the sales console. If your job is about making lots of phone calls to people, as many salespersons' jobs are, then use the sales console. Let me show you what I mean by those two things. So let's just go over to Salesforce, the dashboard first. Here's the dashboard that you can download for free from the App Exchange. If you go to the App Exchange and search for GSP Sales Dashboard, you'll find there's one for Professional Edition and one for Enterprise Edition. But this is the dashboard, so it gives you a whole series of reports and charts that give you much better visibility of sales performance and the sales pipeline. So give people these, create an advantage by giving both users, salespeople, and managers robust visibility of the pipeline. Let them track, for example, the number of times that a deal has moved from one stage to the next. Sales Console. Now, most people that have Enterprise Edition will already have the Sales Console, even if they don't already know it, and actually many Professional Edition users will have it as well. If you don't know, go under Company Information, scroll down to the bottom, and it will tell you whether you have Sales Console users as well. This is the Sales Console, and what it allows you to do is create different lists of things: leads, accounts, contacts, opportunities, and so on. So here's my list of all accounts, and I can click on the first one, and it opens up that account in a new tab. And in fact, I could open up individual contacts in separate sub-tabs. I could look at, in this case, we might say, well, actually, they've also got an opportunity. Let's open that up, and so on. So I could start to call Kirsten, and maybe she's not available at the moment, so I can leave that main tab and this little set of sub-tabs open. I can go back to the next one. Let's call those people. We've got an opportunity there. We want to talk about this one. So again, I've now got 2 tabs open, and I can start to work through my list of accounts that I might need to phone and start to look at those people in more detail here. I might want to hop over and look at leads, for example. Here's our list of leads. I've kept my other tabs open because I haven't finished with those. Let's call this lead, and so on and so forth. So it's just a much easier way to create lists of things that people have to phone. Much nicer, much more usable interface. So make sure you have that configured and set up if you have it. Tracking targets. In Salesforce, every salesperson needs to track their performance against target. So often it's done outside the system on spreadsheets and so on. Setting up account plans and so on. You get the idea. You must create an advantage to using the system. Second one, create a disadvantage to not using it. So for example, you must insist that when we sit down for a one-to-one between a manager and a salesperson, we are using the system. We are using that dashboard to look at the pipeline. Don't come to me with a spreadsheet or a notebook with all of your deals in it. We're going to look at the dashboard. Team meetings. Again, get the dashboard up on the screen. Use Chatter to talk and discuss opportunities. So if you want to engage with me on an opportunity, you want to ask for my advice, or you want to get a pricing discount, do it in the system. You want to have that dialogue, use the Chatter on the actual opportunity itself. It'll stay there forever and a day. Don't send me an email. Use the system. If I want to get an approval request, use the system. If I want to extract all of the products on an opportunity onto a contract, or the contract templates are in Salesforce. So the only way I can get a contract out of the door or a proposal out of the door is by going into the system. Clean your room means make sure you have no out-of-date opportunities, no opportunities with closed dates in the past, and so on, and start to review that kind of thing. So create a disadvantage to not using it. Our third one was about measuring user adoption. Now, there are various dashboards that you can download from the App Exchange about user adoption. I'm not a huge fan, really, of any of them. They put too much emphasis on tracking whether users have logged into the system. I don't really think that tells you a great deal. I guess if a salesperson hasn't logged in for 4 weeks and they're not on holiday or they're not off sick, then that would be something you want to know. But I really think to measure user adoption, you should use reports and dashboard charts that you would use anyway to manage the business. So for example, the number of contacts created and the number of contacts created without an email address. Well, we're trying to increase the size of the database and the number of people available for marketing. So we want to know who's doing that, who's adding contacts, who's populating fields on accounts and opportunities, because that enriches the database. But we can also use pipeline reports, opportunity reports to measure and to assess user adoption, overdue opportunities. If you download that GSP sales dashboard from the App Exchange, at the top of the column, in the middle row at the top of the column, there's the perfect chart for tracking overdue opportunities. Now, at the time of recording this webinar, we have about another 4 or 5 working days left in February. And if I've got deals that were due to close in January, then unless I've got a time turner, those deals aren't going to close in January. It's a sign of user adoption, poor user adoption. Unrealistic stages is another perfect example. So if I've got, let's say my sales process typically lasts 3 months, 4 months, something like that, and in February, I've got a series of deals that are due to close in February, and the opportunity stage is prospecting, or they're still in investigation, or whatever your early stage opportunities are called. Now, if we've only a few days left to go in this month, are those deals really going to close this month? That's important information from the point of view of accuracy of the pipeline, reliability of the sales forecast, but it's also telling you about user adoption as well. If the stages and the close dates are not up to date, that's a user adoption challenge. Also on that dashboard is something called a from to stage movement report, and this tracks, for example, it tracks when an opportunity is updated on the stage, it tracks the from stage and the to stage. So for example, if you look at all of the opportunities that were closed won, where did they come from? If they came from the prospecting stage, or the first stage in your sales process, and went straight to closed won, I accept that does happen sometimes, but it doesn't happen very often in most businesses. What you really want to see is a progression through the opportunity pipeline. If your sales process is 3 or 4 months, you want to see deals as they go through that process. So an excess of deals that go straight from prospecting to won is telling you that you've got issues of user adoption. Conversion rates, you've already heard me harp on about conversion rates. If you have a conversion rate of 60%, 70%, 90%, in my experience, there are no businesses with an opportunity conversion rate of 90%. And you see it quite often on Salesforce dashboards. And it's because people aren't putting in opportunities unless they're confident a deal is there to be done. It's a user adoption issue. So look at conversion rates as a way of assessing these sort of things. So now you have some hard information, we can start to manage user adoption. And I don't really think that managing user adoption is too different from managing anything else that's important in the business. You need to be clear what's expected. You need to compliment and reward people for doing it well. You take remedial action for people that are not achieving what you want. You make sure managers know how to coach using the system. They know how to interpret dashboards. And you deliver some training. You make sure people do know how to use the tools that you're giving them in order to become more efficient and more effective. And really these last two bullet points are probably the crucial ones. You just make Salesforce the way we work. You use it in team meetings. You use it in discussion. You're using Chatter. You make Salesforce integral to the way that you manage your sales effort. So let's take a couple of examples of how that all fits together and how that works. My first example is from a large investment banking organization. They had poor user adoption. We ran some workshops. We spoke to a whole bunch of people, and we concluded that there wasn't really too much wrong with the system. So they were able to use it, but people simply weren't willing to use it. They weren't willing to share their information to share companies, and they certainly weren't willing to be public, if you like, about their opportunities. So what happened in that organization? Well, in that business, it's a global organization, and Thomas, the SVP of sales, has a weekly call with each of his territories, with each of his country managers. So he'd have all of the country managers for Latin America or for Europe on a call together. And in the past, people would be submitting spreadsheets and so on. No more. What he did was got up on the screen, he got the dashboard, and there was a conversation. And at times that was a painful conversation that Thomas would have with that group. So Mr. Latin America managers, why do we have opportunities with out-of-date close dates? Why do we have early stage opportunities due to close this month? Get your forecasts up to date, get your pipeline up to date. And at times in that group, that was a slightly uncomfortable conversation. But guess what? Each of those country managers then went and made absolutely sure that the people that were reporting to them, their pipelines were up to date, their stages and their deals were up to date. And of course, guess what? That just simply washes through to the country level. They implemented account plans, so they tracked the number of account plans. We ran a webinar 2 weeks ago on how to do account planning in Salesforce. So if you haven't seen that, go back onto our website or YouTube and have a look at that. They implemented pricing approval, so that business about only getting a discount through the system, they did that. They insisted that dashboards and reports were used in one-to-ones between managers and subordinates, and we created a little bit of functionality to record the discussion and record the outcome of one-to-ones, the manager comments and the subordinate comments. That was recorded and measured in Salesforce, obviously only so that individuals could see the appropriate information. They made user adoption, the measures, they made it a key part of the appraisal process and their management performance objectives. And in this particular company, we did deliver training. People actually knew how to use the system, but we did quite a lot of face-to-face training around the world because we wanted to remove that excuse that, oh, I don't really know how to use the system. Well, we spent quite a lot of money paying Gary and his team to go around the world and train everybody, make sure absolutely everybody knows how to use all of the bits of the system that they would reasonably be expected to use. So it kind of took away any of that excuse. And they went from low user adoption to absolutely full and effective user adoption. So this second example is from a manufacturing company, and there we concluded most people were willing to use the system. They simply weren't very able to use it. For example, the system Salesforce hadn't been adapted to meet their needs. So what we did about that, For example, we have an app called the GSP Product Selection Wizard. It makes it much easier to find and add products to quotes and opportunities. They have thousands of products in this business, so we made it much easier to find those products and add them to opportunities. They deal with a lot of framework agreements, so they have to schedule revenue over the time, and again we have an app that looks at that. We brought in data from their ERP system, order line item and invoice line item data. We brought that into Salesforce. It makes it, this is important information from an account management point of view, but that information is difficult to get. You've got to log onto a difficult to use ERP system. So we brought all of that data into Salesforce. We implemented target tracking in Salesforce. Again, we have an app to do that, and we have a webinar published about that as well, so have a look for that. And we delivered some dashboard coaching. In other words, we trained managers on how to, not only how to simply understand the charts that are on the GSP sales dashboard, but how to use them as well to improve sales performance, and how to use them for coaching point of view. Now, in this company, we didn't deliver lots of face-to-face training. We took the trainer approach because people were already willing to use the system. They were just unsure how to use certain parts of it, and certain parts of it hadn't been elaborated in terms of the configuration. So there we used the trainer approach, and again, very effective in driving up full user adoption. So again, it's about deciding where your larger group of people are, where your company mindset is in terms of being able to use the system and then willing to use it, and then applying those strategies: an advantage to using the system, a disadvantage to not using it, measuring it, and managing user adoption. So it's about understanding where people are and then applying those 4 strategies, putting the emphasis where you believe it's most important based on where people are on this matrix. I'm pleased to say, for everybody that has registered for this webinar, we have an offer for you. We will come and do either an on-site workshop with you or a web-based review. We do quite a those these sessions online as well. So we'll give you a 2-hour workshop. We'll go through Salesforce with you. We'll identify those quick wins. We'll identify those other things that you can do that might be in the longer term but might deliver lots of benefit as well. And we'll help you understand how to drive up user adoption in your business. And we'll then take another hour to write up our findings, our recommendations, and we'll spend that time with you, either again face-to-face or on a web meeting, and we'll give you some recommendations and ideas for both quick wins and how to boost user adoption. So simply get in touch, hit reply on the email that we've sent you in relation to the webinar, or go to our website and simply get in touch with us, and we'll give you a call. Ben will call you and we'll set up a good time to talk. Thank you everybody very much indeed for attending. Go out and drive user adoption in your business. Thank you.